if you are making 10 pieces of egg roll, you will need 5 cups of flour, sugar 100 grams, butter 100 grams, salt 1 teaspoon, baking powder, which is supposed to be 1 tablespoon. But if you're adding yeast, it's going to be half tablespoon. Then you add half teaspoon of yeast, your nutmeg 2 teaspoons, milk flavor 1 tablespoon, then 2 cups of water. When you are adding yeast, you are going to reduce your baking powder. And your yeast, you don't add too much because you are not making puff puff. You just want your egg roll to be light, soft, and fluffy. So follow me carefully because there is a technique I use in measuring my yeast. You don't just add yeast like the way you add your baking powder. You do it differently. Now, if you're making 20 pieces of egg rolls, you need 10 cups of flour, sugar 200 grams, butter 200 grams, salt 2 teaspoons, baking powder 2 tablespoons, nutmeg 1 tablespoon, milk flavor 2 tablespoons, and water 4 cups. Now, if you're adding yeast now to your egg roll, you don't want to go for just baking powder alone. You will reduce your baking powder to 1.5 tablespoons, and your yeast, you add 1 teaspoon of yeast. It's the same quantity of yeast you add for 10, you use for 20 because you increased your baking powder. So that's for that. Now, for 30 pieces of egg roll, you will need 15 cups of flour, sugar 300 grams, butter 300 grams. Now, you are going to now reduce your baking powder from 3 tablespoons to 2 tablespoons. Then you add 2 teaspoons of yeast. You can see the way I'm increasing the yeast gradually because the yeast is actually to make your egg roll light, soft, and fluffy, not to make it look like puff puff. If you add it too much, it will make it look like puff puff. But if you add it in little quantity, it will just come out light, fluffy, and really enjoyable. Everyone that tastes your egg roll will love it. So take note of these measurements. I'm telling you from experience, so that is just it. Now, if you are going for 40 pieces of egg roll, you will need 20 cups of flour, butter 400 grams, sugar 400 grams, salt 4 teaspoons, baking powder 4 tablespoons, nutmeg 2 teaspoons, milk flavor 4 tablespoons, then 8 cups of water. Now, if you are using salted butter, you may need to skip the salt altogether. Now, if you are going on now to add yeast to your 40 pieces of egg roll, you are going to reduce your baking powder from 4 tablespoons to 3 tablespoons. Then you're adding 1 tablespoon of yeast to 40 pieces of egg roll. Now, make sure your baking powder is active and your yeast is also very active. So check the expiring date of your yeast. Make sure you buy a very good yeast so that you can maximize these measurements and get the best egg roll recipe using yeast and baking powder. I advise you don't use yeast alone. Mix it with your baking powder. If you use yeast alone, your egg roll will come out looking like puff puff and it won't be nice. It will be too soft and it will absorb oil. But if you use baking powder and yeast, there is this balance it gives. I'm going to put a link of a video where I combine both. You will love the egg roll recipe. It is light, it is soft, and it is very fluffy. So for 50 pieces, you will need 25 cups of flour, 500 grams of sugar, butter 500 grams, salt 5 teaspoons, baking powder 5 tablespoons, nutmeg 2.5 teaspoons, milk flavor 5 tablespoons, water 10 cups. Now, if you want to add yeast to 50 pieces of egg roll, you will need 4 tablespoons of baking powder plus 1 tablespoon of yeast. Yes, the same 1 tablespoon of yeast, because if you're using a very active yeast, you don't need much. A little goes a very long way. Alongside with your 4 tablespoons of baking powder, my dear, it is enough. So that is for that. I'm going to put a link of a video where I made my egg roll combining yeast and baking powder. You can check that out so that it will give you an idea of how to make your egg roll using these recipes and their measurements. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel. Do like, share, and subscribe, and see you in my next one. Bye bye. Good to have you here. See you.